Something big is clearly taking shape inside the Philadelphia Eagles organization as the 2026 NFL Draft sits just one day away, and if you've been following the signals closely, you can feel that this isn't just another routine offseason moment. The front office, led by Howie Roseman, is once again positioning itself to be aggressive, calculated, and unpredictable when it matters most. And when you break down the assets they're working with, it becomes even more intriguing for what could unfold. Right now, the Eagles are set to go on the clock with the 23rd overall pick in the first round, but that's just the beginning of their ammunition. They hold pick 54 in the second round, two third-round selections at 68 and 98, followed by multiple mid to late round picks including 114, 137, 178, and 197. That's a full arsenal, and if history tells us anything, it's that Roseman rarely sits still with that kind of flexibility. Over the last 5 drafts alone, he's made a significant number of moves during draft weekend, including 8 trades in 2024 alone, tying a record. Even more telling, he has moved up in the first round in 4 of the last 5 years. So the idea of Philadelphia staying at 23? That feels far from guaranteed. Now, let's get straight into the projection that's generating buzz. At pick 23, the Eagles are targeting Max Ehonore, the right tackle out of Arizona State. This isn't just about filling a need, it's about planning for the future in a way this franchise consistently prioritizes. With Lane Johnson approaching the later stages of his career, turning 36 soon, the Eagles are clearly thinking ahead. Ehonore fits the mold perfectly. Elite physical traits, massive upside, and the kind of developmental ceiling that the organization loves to invest in. What makes him even more fascinating is his background. Born in Nigeria, he only started playing football in 2021, which means what we're seeing now is just the surface of his potential. Despite being raw in certain technical areas like hand placement and penalty discipline, his athletic profile is undeniable. He didn't allow a single sack this past season at Arizona State, and his performance during the Senior Bowl and NFL Combine turned heads across the league. The footwork, often described as basketball feet, gives him the mobility needed at the next level, even if refinement is still needed. And here's where things get even more interesting. There's a very real possibility that the Eagles don't even wait until 23 to make their move. A potential trade scenario could see them jump up to pick 15, acquiring it from Tampa Bay to get ahead of teams like Detroit, who may also be targeting offensive line talent. In that situation, Philadelphia could still land a player like Ehonore, or pivot to other top-tier prospects like Monroe Freeling or Caden Proctor, depending on how the board falls. The cost? Likely their 23rd pick and one of their third-round selections, possibly the 68th overall pick. This is classic Eagles strategy. Build in the trenches, secure long-term stability, and stay one step ahead of roster turnover before it becomes a problem. It's not about reacting, it's about anticipating. But here's where the conversation gets real for you as a fan. If the Eagles do go in this direction, prioritizing a developmental offensive tackle with high upside instead of an immediate impact skill player, how do you feel about that approach? Is planning for the future the right move here? Or should this team be targeting someone who contributes right away in a championship window? And that's where the second phase of this strategy really starts to reveal itself, because once you move past that first round decision, the direction of this draft becomes even more telling about what the Philadelphia Eagles are preparing for behind the scenes. At pick 54 in the second round, the projection shifts to wide receiver Chris Bell, and this is where things take a sharp turn that might surprise a lot of fans. The logic behind this selection is directly tied to a major roster implication, the potential departure of A.J. Brown. If that scenario becomes reality, the Eagles would immediately need to replace not just production, but a very specific type of presence on the field. Bell brings that physical profile. He's not just another receiver. He's someone who can operate in traffic, win on inside breaking routes, and create yards after the catch, which is exactly what made Brown so dominant in this offense. Now, it's important to understand that Bell isn't a perfect prospect. There are medical concerns after tearing his ACL in November, and that's something teams will weigh heavily, but purely from a talent standpoint, there's a strong belief that without that injury, he could have been a first-round player. In just 11 games last season, he put up 72 receptions for 917 yards and 6 touchdowns, while significantly improving his drop rate. Once he builds momentum, his speed becomes a serious weapon, and that ability to turn short gains into explosive plays fits perfectly into what this offense has relied on. Moving into the third round at pick 68, the focus flips back to the defensive side, with edge rusher Denai Dennis Sutton out of Penn State. Even after adding pieces like Arnold Ebiketie and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka in free agency, there's still a clear need for young, cost-controlled talent at the edge position. With key defensive players already getting paid and more contracts looming, this is about maintaining depth and sustainability. Dennis Sutton brings a disruptive presence. His production has steadily increased every year, reaching 50 pressures in his most recent season along with 8.5 sacks and multiple forced fumbles. He's long, physical, and plays with an intensity that fits Philadelphia perfectly. While his pass rush arsenal still needs development, the raw tools are there, and under the guidance of coaches like Vic Fangio and Clint Hurt, there's confidence that he can evolve into a consistent contributor. At pick 98, the Eagles address another key defensive need, safety. With the departure of Reed Blankenship, there's a gap that needs to be filled, and Jalen Kilgore offers a versatile solution. He's not just a traditional safety, he can line up in the slot, play a hybrid linebacker role, and bring physicality against the run. While he does have moments of inconsistency in coverage, his athleticism and adaptability give the coaching staff a lot to work with. In today's NFL, that kind of versatility is incredibly valuable. Then at pick 114, the Eagles turn their attention to the tight end position with Nate Borkachair, out of Texas A&M. This is another forward-thinking move. With Dallas Goedert eventually nearing the later stages of his tenure, the team is clearly looking to develop the next option. Borkachair stands out primarily for his blocking ability, something the Eagles noticeably lacked last season. While his receiving production has been limited, there are flashes of upside there, and in this system, tight ends are often developed into more complete players over time. As the draft continues into the later rounds, a clear pattern emerges. At pick 137, offensive tackle Drew Shelton adds more depth and athleticism to the line, reinforcing the commitment to building in the trenches. At 178, Isaiah World brings physicality and size, even if he remains technically raw. These are the kinds of picks that may not generate headlines now, but could become crucial pieces down the road. And then comes one of the most intriguing swings in this entire class. At pick 197, the Eagles take a chance on Or Bernard, a defensive tackle from Nigeria via the International Pathway Program. This is a move that echoes what the team once did with Jordan Mailata. Bernard is extremely raw, with no competitive football experience, but his athletic testing is off the charts. At 6'4", over 300 pounds, with explosive metrics across the board, he represents the kind of high upside gamble that costs very little but could pay off in a big way over time. And because of the program he's coming through, he doesn't even count against the active roster, making this a low-risk, high-reward situation. When you step back and look at the full picture, this draft strategy tells a very specific story. It's about balancing the present with the future. It's about preparing for potential roster changes before they happen, while continuing to build depth in the most important areas. The Eagles aren't just drafting players, they're building a long-term structure that can sustain success. So now it comes down to you. Looking at this entire approach, from the potential first-round offensive tackle to the wide receiver decision and the defensive reinforcements, do you believe this is the right direction for the team, or would you rather see a more aggressive push for immediate impact stars instead of long-term development pieces? And if this is the path they take, which pick stands out to you the most as a potential game changer? What really makes this entire projection even more compelling is how consistent it is with the identity that Philadelphia Eagles have built over the last several years. This isn't a team that chases headlines on draft night just for the sake of excitement. Every move, every pick, every potential trade is tied to a bigger picture that often only becomes clear months or even years later. If you go back and study the tendencies of Howie Roseman, one thing stands out above everything else. He values flexibility just as much as talent. That's why having this many picks matters so much. It's not just about who they select, it's about how they can maneuver the board, control value, and stay ahead of other teams trying to target the same players. And in a draft like this, where multiple positions, offensive line, wide receiver, edge, and secondary, are all quietly becoming areas of transition, that flexibility becomes even more critical. Think about it from a roster building perspective. You potentially secure your future right tackle in Max Ehonore, giving yourself a seamless transition plan from Lane Johnson. You prepare for a possible shift at wide receiver with Chris Bell, who could step step into a larger role if A.J. Brown is no longer part of the long-term picture. You reinforce your defensive front with young, high-upside talent like Dennis Sutton, while also addressing the secondary with a versatile piece in Jalen Kilgore. And then, quietly but importantly, you continue investing in the offensive line depth, something that has been the backbone of this franchise for years. Even when injuries hit, even when rotations change, the Eagles have consistently prioritized staying strong in the trenches. That's not by accident, that's by design. But here's the part that might divide the fan base a little bit. This entire approach leans heavily toward patience. It leans toward development. It leans toward trusting the coaching staff to mold raw talent into impact players over time. And while that has worked before, just look at what happened with Jordan Mailata. It also requires belief that the system will continue to maximize these players at the highest level. Because let's be honest, there's always that other side of the argument. There are fans who will look at this and say, why not go all in on proven, immediate impact players? Why not use these picks, especially in the early rounds, to bring in someone who can step in right away and push this team closer to a championship right now? That's the tension. That's the balance the Eagles are trying to strike. And as the draft gets closer, the biggest question isn't just who they'll pick, it's which philosophy they'll lean into when they're officially on the clock. If you've made it this far, you're clearly locked in on everything happening with this team, so now I want to hear from you. Do you trust this long-term build through the trenches strategy, or do you think the Eagles should be more aggressive in chasing immediate star power? And the truth is, the moment that clock starts ticking, everything we just talked about can change in seconds. That's the reality of the NFL draft, especially when a front office like the one led by Howie Roseman is involved. They don't just react to the board, they manipulate it. If there's a run on offensive tackles earlier than expected, don't be surprised if Philadelphia gets aggressive and jumps up. If certain players slide, they could just as easily trade back and stack even more value. That unpredictability is what makes this situation so fascinating. Because while this projection lays out a clear roadmap, building for the future, reinforcing key positions, and maintaining long-term flexibility, it only takes one unexpected move from another team to completely reshape the Eagles' plan. And keep this in mind too, every pick isn't just about 2026, it's about 2027, 2028, and beyond. It's about making sure that when veterans age out or contracts become too heavy, there's already a young, developed player ready to step in without a drop-off. That's how sustained contenders operate, and that's exactly what the Philadelphia Eagles are trying to remain. So as we head into draft night, all eyes are going to be on that first move. Do they stay at 23 and trust their board? Do they package picks and go get their guy early? Or do they surprise everyone and pivot in a completely different direction? And that's exactly why trying to predict the final outcome feels almost impossible, because the Philadelphia Eagles thrive in chaos when it comes to draft night. They embrace it. While other teams panic when the board doesn't fall their way, Philadelphia tends to find opportunity in those exact moments. That's where the real advantage shows up. You have to remember, this front office has built a reputation around staying one step ahead. It's not just about scouting talent, it's about understanding the league, anticipating runs at certain positions, and knowing when to strike. And with Howie Roseman working the phones, there's always the possibility that a move is already being lined up behind the scenes before their pick even comes up.